Frederik Paulsen, a name that sounds like it belongs to a classical portrait. But the life behind that name reads like an atlas, a laboratory notebook, and a ship's log rolled into one. Born in Stockholm in 1950 to a family already steeped in scientific curiosity, Paulsen took a modest, quietly brilliant pharmaceutical firm and pushed it into the upper ranks of global biotech, all while nurturing a less expected identity: explorer, conservationist, and provocateur of big, often inconvenient conversations about science, the sea, and the future of medicine. He arrives in our story as the son of a founder. Ferring Pharmaceuticals began in Sweden in 1950 as a tiny lab built around pioneering hormone research. Frederik Paulsen Sr., a medical doctor who had fled Nazi persecution in Germany and settled in Sweden, founded the company with a passionate focus on peptides and hormones, molecules that would, over decades, reshape women's health, fertility treatments, and a number of niche but vital medical fields. Frederik Jr. grew up in the orbit of that work: laboratories, researchers, and the idea that meticulous science could translate into real, life-changing therapies. Frederik's education reads like a preparation for a cross-disciplinary career. He studied chemistry and business in Europe, adding a doctoral-level engagement with ideas in Paris. Those twin strands, deep science and a pragmatic sense for management, would define his approach. He formally joined the company in the mid-1970s and took the reins of day-to-day leadership in the early 1980s, inheriting a business that, by global pharmaceutical standards, was small but scientifically solid. The question he faced was not whether Ferring had expertise, it did, but whether it could scale without losing the scientific core that made it valuable. What happened next is a classic case study in patient, deliberate growth. Paulsen did not pursue headline-grabbing IPOs or splashy Wall Street plays. Instead, he doubled down on the company's strengths: peptide-based therapies and reproductive medicine, fields that require deep research, long clinical pathways, and a tolerance for technical complexity that big pharma sometimes underestimates. Over decades, he transformed Ferring from a regional specialty maker into a global, privately held powerhouse. Revenue that had once measured in the low tens of millions grew into the multi-billion-dollar range, a result of steady investment in R&D, strategic international expansion, and an emphasis on specialty products that could dominate narrow but critical markets. That long arc, small lab to global biotech, is the central business achievement of Paulsen's life. To understand Paulsen's success, you have to understand a company that chose focus over flash. Ferring built deep expertise in reproductive medicine, fertility drugs, protocols for assisted reproductive technologies, and treatments for complications around childbirth. It also developed strengths in urology, gastroenterology, and endocrinology. These are not the mass-market blockbuster categories that headline pharmaceutical press releases. They are specialized niches where a company with the right peptide chemistry, clinical know-how, and regulatory patience can become indispensable to hospitals and clinics worldwide. By staying private, Ferring could plan decades-long research programs, protect patient-focused development, and make investments the public market might have punished for being slow to pay off. The result: a company laser-focused on life-stage medicine and a founder who played the long game. Paulsen's leadership style reflected that long-game mentality. He was not the CEO who sought constant publicity. He was strategic and, by most accounts, intensely curious. He surrounded himself with scientific talent, invested in state-of-the-art peptide synthesis and formulation, and expanded manufacturing and regulatory capabilities across continents. Ferring, under his watch, built an international footprint, not just sales offices, but clinical programs, research sites, and manufacturing facilities that gave the company robust control over both science and supply. That vertical heft matters in reproductive medicine and in treatments where stability, cold chains, and regulatory continuity are essential. Over time, Those investments translated into clinical credibility and a kind of institutional muscle few privately held pharmas possess. And yet, for all his careful corporate stewardship, Paulsen is not a lab coat alone. He cultivated a public persona, sometimes private, sometimes unmistakably adventurous, that blended philanthropy, exploration, and cultural patronage. He has funded scientific expeditions to polar regions, hosted researchers studying ice and ocean systems, and used his own resources to facilitate fieldwork that large institutions sometimes struggle to finance. Paulsen has stood on remote polar outposts and financed oceanographic projects. These are not mere hobbies for headlines, but part of a wider commitment to science and the environment. He has described himself as deeply concerned about climate change and the rapid degradation of polar ice, concerns that link to broader conversations about global health and the systems that sustain human life. There is a rhetorical contrast here that is worth pausing on. A man whose business life is measured in micrograms and milliliters spends a great deal of personal capital on the planet's largest, coldest theaters. That fascination with extremes has produced headline moments that tell you a lot about Paulsen's personality. He has undertaken daring flights over Siberia, been involved in deep-sea submersible dives, and supported scientific teams working on remote islands. These exploits paint a picture of a person who pushes boundaries, not to feed ego, but to bring back data, to sponsor research, and to spotlight the fragility of ecological systems. His expeditions are research-adjacent, part adventure, part platform for science. That adventurous streak sometimes intersected with geopolitics. Paulsen has worked in Russia and engaged with Russian scientific communities, and in the past, he has been honored by Russian institutions for his polar work. Such ties, especially in recent years, have drawn scrutiny as international politics shifted. Ownership of polar routes, the complexities of Arctic tourism, and the geopolitics of scientific access have made such relationships more sensitive than they once were. Paulsen's investments and exchanges in northern regions are a reminder that science rarely sits apart from politics, and that private patrons who fund exploration sometimes end up navigating diplomatic shoals. It's a complicated chapter in a life that defies simple categorization. Back at the company, Paulsen's tenure coincided with important medical breakthroughs and strategic product moves. Ferring's focus on peptides, short chains of amino acids that mimic or modulate natural hormones, positioned the firm to innovate in fertility protocols and in therapies that require precise biological mimicry. The company also invested in stability technologies and delivery platforms, efforts that made certain therapies more practical in real-world clinical settings, including in regions where cold-chain logistics are challenging. Those seemingly technical advances have outsized human impacts: more reliable fertility treatments, safer obstetric interventions, and therapies tailored to complex endocrine disorders. When you read the list of conditions Ferring's medicines touch, infertility, obstetric hemorrhage, certain urologic conditions, you see a through line. These are interventions that change life trajectories, not just blood test numbers. Paulsen's private ownership model deserves another look because it's central to any story about modern pharma success that doesn't involve a public listing. Without the quarter-to-quarter pressure of public shareholders, he could invest in niche science, fund multi-year clinical trials, and prioritize therapeutic impact over immediate profit margins. That's an approach that has trade-offs. Private firms sometimes lack the capital access of big public players, but it also enables a continuity of purpose. Paulsen used that continuity like a telescope. He focused on far-off clinical goals and tuned the company's resources to reach them. In markets that reward patient capital, the strategy paid off. Ferring amassed a portfolio of specialty drugs and a global presence that made it an indispensable partner to clinics and hospitals across continents. There are also the human contours around Paulsen's life, his philanthropy, and his cultural footprint. He supported scientific institutions, cultural preservation projects, and conservation initiatives. That work, funding research stations, backing marine conservation, and supporting cultural programs, positions him as more than a biotech baron. It casts him as a steward of sorts, someone who deploys private wealth to fund public goods. Of course, The relationship between private philanthropy and public science is complicated, and critics rightly ask whether private agendas shape research priorities in ways that public oversight might not. But even critics have to acknowledge that, in practice, Paulsen's funding has enabled fieldwork and research programs that might otherwise have struggled to find financial footing. Paulsen's personal story is also one of family legacy and succession. The Paulsen name is woven into Ferring's identity. The founder's scientific breakthroughs in the 1950s established a culture of peptide chemistry that later leaders built on. In recent years, governance evolved. Frederik Paulsen transitioned from chairman to chairman emeritus in 2021 as the company adapted to the next generation of leadership. That transition is a telling moment. It signals continuity, but also an opening for new strategic perspectives, including a more institutionalized governance structure designed to keep a family-founded firm competitive in a world of rapid biotech consolidation. It's a delicate balancing act, protecting a scientific legacy while modernizing governance for a fast-evolving industry. What about the money? Paulsen's stewardship delivered enormous value for the company and, in consequence, for his personal net worth. Estimates have placed his fortune in the multi-billion-dollar range, a figure that grows out of Ferring's global revenues and the compact but high-value nature of its portfolio. But numbers alone don't capture the texture of his wealth. Much of it is tied to a privately held company that is run like a mission-driven enterprise rather than a publicly traded behemoth. That structure affects how wealth is deployed, in patient R&D, in philanthropic expeditions, and in long-term investments in science and conservation, rather than in short-term financial engineering. Critics and competitors have sometimes questioned the opacity that private ownership brings. Without the transparency demanded by stock markets, privately held giants can be harder to scrutinize. When private capital meets geopolitically sensitive exploration, or when a company's investments touch regions under diplomatic strain, scrutiny intensifies. Paulsen's ties to Russian scientific communities and polar ventures have at times prompted uncomfortable headlines and diplomatic questions. Those controversies complicate the narrative. They do not erase the scientific contributions, but they remind us that global business and global science operate inside complicated political ecosystems. Still, the human effect of the company's medicines is plain. Ferring's long-term investments in fertility and obstetric care have translated into protocols used by practitioners in IVF clinics and maternity wards around the world. The small molecules and peptides developed under Paulsen's watch have, in many cases, improved the practicalities of treatment, making therapies more stable, more deliverable, and safer for patients. That kind of impact is the quiet miracle of specialty pharma. It doesn't always make front-page headlines, but it changes countless private lives. For a channel called Billionaire Bios, it's worth noting that Paulsen's wealth is deeply entangled with tangible clinical interventions that affect real families. There's a final element to Paulsen's story that feels almost literary: the tension between a life of meticulous laboratory work and a life spent on the edge of maps. It is one thing to spend decades perfecting peptide sequences in a lab. It is another to fly over Siberia, fund submersible dives, or stand on polar ice measuring the slow disintegration of the planet's frozen margins. Together, these two halves form a portrait of a man whose curiosity is not confined to one domain. Science, business, and exploration feed each other in his life. The scientific mindset informs his adventures, and his adventures inform his scientific priorities and philanthropy. If you want a one-line summation, try this. Frederik Paulsen is a biotech builder who treats the company as an engine for science and treats the world as a place where that science must be tested, observed, and defended. So where does his legacy sit? In the short term, it is the medicines, fertility protocols that clinics rely on, specialty drugs that address conditions of life and reproduction, and a company infrastructure that supports those therapies globally. In the longer term, the legacy is more diffuse, a model of private, mission-driven ownership in biotech. An example of how a firm can combine rigorous peptide science with patient capital, and a biography that ties corporate success to public-facing philanthropy and scientific exploration. Whether you admire him, question him, or simply find his mix of lab and shipboard compelling, Frederik Paulsen is a figure who resists simple labels. And in that resistance, he exemplifies a modern kind of industrial patron. One foot in the lab, the other on the deck of a ship, heading toward the poles. If there's a moral to this story for anyone building a life in science or business, it is this: specialization plus patience can produce outsized impact. Paulsen did not chase the loudest markets. He invested in what he and his scientists believed mattered. And along the way, he used private capital to open doors for science in places that needed a sponsor: polar research stations, deep sea dives, and conservation efforts that demand long-term commitment. His is a reminder that influence in the modern world can be exercised in laboratories and in expeditions alike, and that the best biographies usually trace a line between what people make and what they care about.